Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Standing Post. For this month's episode, we bring back our favorite foreign investigative analyst from the Paris field office. You may have remembered him from episode 11, where we spoke about his work investigating the murders in Muskegon County, Michigan. In this interview, he focuses on his roles and responsibilities as an investigative analyst in Europe. In the latter part of the interview, he speaks on another case he worked titled Champaign Charlie. We here at Standing Post want to thank everyone again for their dedication and support throughout 2020. We know it may not have been a positive year for all our listeners, but hopefully the podcast provided something to look forward to each month. We do plan on having new and different guests for the new year, so you can stay informed about what we do here at the Secret Service. So stay strong, listeners, and stay vigilant. Now, please welcome back to the show, investigative analyst Ryan Heethius. Well, Ryan, welcome back to the show. I want to thank you again for being back on and being able to talk to us about another case with the listeners. And we're going to actually talk a little bit more some of your time that has been in France and your roles and responsibilities out there. But just to kind of give a memory jog, can you just introduce yourself again for the listeners?
Of course. So my name is Ryan Heethius. I'm an investigative analyst in our Paris field office. Been on with the service for about 8 years, first 6 in Detroit.
Okay, and just as a reference to the listeners, the last time we had our discussion or talked on the podcast was we were talking about the murders that were taking place in Muskegon County back in Michigan. So I kind of want to talk about first before we get into the investigation of Champaign Charlie.
Yep.
But the one thing I did mention is that you're right now currently in France and you are working with our partners overseas to do the same investigative or analyst work, excuse me. So I guess maybe set the stage, like how does one from the Secret Service, how do they go out to a detail like that or out to a position like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that's really kind of unique about our agency is just the opportunities for these really unique, travel. Be it on a protective detail where you're traveling the world with a protectee. Otherwise, we also have a number of foreign offices where that's we're this dual mission. So that's more on our investigative track. So we have a number of foreign offices, and from an ISD standpoint, we have one analyst that kind of covers the overseas footprint. So that's where I'm there in Paris, and it's just trying to do as much as you can drinking from a fire hose. There's no borders with these crimes anymore, so it's there's a lot of work. So between supporting London and The Hague, where Europol is, and Madrid and Tallinn, you've got all these offices in Europe where we have agents over there, and I'm responsible for kind of supporting them the best I can from the analytical side.
And so when you do that kind of investigative work over there, are you working through what other partners are you working through? Because obviously you have your law enforcement partners all over Europe. Are you working with any other federal agencies over there too?
Of course. So the one of those things that you kind of realize when you get over there is it's different. You're not in the U.S., so you have no kind of law enforcement authority over there. So you're working through the host country. So you've got to establish these relationships. And one of the primary responsibilities, the relationships we have overseas is with Europol. So we have a couple agents that sit there at Europol, and we send temporary assignments. And I've made a number of temporary week long assignments up there where I'll go and sit in the office there as well. But I mean, that's kind of where the world kind of comes together. So you've got all the major U.S. law enforcement there, our friends in Canada, and then all of the EU and a lot of the other partner agencies. So that's kind of where they're all together, where you work these big global cases and that touch multiple jurisdictions where you don't have to worry about traveling over somewhere that you walk down the hall and you're in another country. So I mean, it's really a unique environment for these cases to really move forward.
Have you met any foreign IA counterparts over there? Someone that would be exactly like you here in the United States? I mean, do you develop that kind of relationship with individuals like that?
Yes, I mean, one of the things at Europol is it's very analytically driven. So I mean, you have a number of specialty units that we kind of have within the service, but they have them there at Europol. So I mean, you're going to have the people that exclusively focus on cybercrime and ones that focus on child exploitation. So there's a number of analysts there that are really bright and really help move domestic cases and secret service cases along for us.
And where has this position taken you within Europe? Or where have you been?
For work, I've been, I think 5 or 6 different countries. I've been there about a year and a half, and my wife is always planning the next family trips. We've been another, dozen places just doing personal travel. It's one of those unique experiences we're trying to take advantage of because, you're never going to live that close to all these great places around the world. So it's a time crunch, but we make it work.
And maybe if I can go back to the question is, as far as the I use the term area of responsibility, but what is the scope like as far as the countries you work with? I mean, how far does it stretch out to as far as boundary wise or jurisdiction?
So the Paris district covers kind of Western Europe, but I mean, these cases they stretch all over. So I mean, we'll work with our partners in the Rome district and in the Pacific area. So I mean, that ties back to some of our domestic office. I mean, it kind of goes all over. So strictly speaking, it's kind of the immediate Western Europe, but it's these cases stretch everywhere.
So, at what point during your time in the Detroit field office did you find out about the international programs that we have within the organization and the fact that position that was available?
Yeah. So I mean, I always kind of knew that it existed, and it was just as the years went on, I talked often with the former analyst that was there, and talked to other people, and just tried to navigate. Is this something that would be right for me? Is this something where I think I would enjoy it, and find the work fulfilling, and all of those things. So just kind of progressed over my time in Detroit, and was always kind of in the back of your head. It's like, oh, that'd be kind of a fun adventure and thing to do.
So, your first couple of months that you're in the Paris field office and you're doing the initial IA work that's involved over there, what were besides the obvious, the cultural differences? What is the difference between a person that may be in the U.S. doing investigative analyst work as opposed to the work that you do in Paris?
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of the first things you realize when you get over there is how different it is. I mean, it's different types of cases. So in Detroit, we would often be working on kind of the end level users with credit card fraud and things like that. Whereas once you get overseas, now on our cases, usually if they stretch overseas, I mean, you're talking about kind of higher level people in these operations and working with our foreign partners. That's who they're interested in working in. So I mean, you're getting into the cyber world and cryptocurrencies and all these things that I have some experience in, but certainly not an expertise like I would with other areas of investigative work that I was doing in domestic offices. So kind of one of the first things I got there was figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to really kind of put myself in a position to excel here and then to build up this program on the analytical side to make it sustainable going forward. So a friend of mine had suggested a master's program in cybercrime investigations and computer forensics. That's one of the first things I did when I got there was, enrolled in that. So I've been completing that and getting as much training as you can and leaning on him for his expertise and really trying to figure out what we can do to, take these cases that I was working in Detroit and now looking at it, from more overview of, these are the top level people. How can we move these things along? So
And with our partners, what's the involvement? So if you can give like a percentage as far as like the domestic or the stuff that you do in the U.S. or in the Detroit field office compared to our foreign partners, foreign law enforcement partners, like what's the percentage of the work? Or is it like 100% hands off? How and where and when are you involved in the arrest process and the investigation process?
yeah, so I mean, in international offices, you'll never really be involved in going hands on in an arrest or things like that, unless it's one of our fugitives. But as you kind of work these collaborative cases, it kind of varies country to country, and you just have to navigate. And that's kind of what you learn over there. Is it's this job, it's all about relationships, and it's how to cultivate those relationships so that it's mutually beneficial. And this country may be kind of hands off, and you do a little bit here and there. Other ones you have a more collaborative environment, and that's kind of where things can really excel in Europol. So that's since I've got there, I've been trying to build up, what can we do from an ISD and an analytical standpoint to really, support these global operations that we're working and really move them forward. And ultimately, I want to build something up so that when my time ends in Paris, the next one behind me can come in and kind of hit the ground running, so that they're not kind of dealing with these same things of trying to kind of build this up.
And how long do you usually stay? What's a tour there?
It varies, but I mean, you're there for a minimum of 3 years, and then go up to 4 or 5.
Okay. And so from that opportunity, are you allowed to travel to other foreign offices, or do you have to come back to the States?
Nope. So at the end of this tour, you then go back to the states.
And so being in that position, what would you tell any other fellow IAs how to get that position after you leave? Is it something that you feel like what could someone do now to better themselves to be able to compete for that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody in the program that's interested would certainly be competitive for the positions. I mean, I think anybody that has the skills to do it. So I don't think it's anything on that front. It's the biggest adjustment to it, and the biggest commitment to it is on the family front. So I mean, if it's something that they're interested in, it's really, talking with your family. Is this something that you think we could do? And so that would, when the time comes, you're ready to say, okay, let's do it, and you really kind of put yourself into it and fully commit. So I mean, it's a big adjustment because it's not just you moving; it's your whole family coming with you.
Okay. And so if somebody from the outside was looking to do investigation or investigative analyst work, like what would you suggest that they study, look into, like what type of programs in education?
Yes, I mean, I think any computer-based classes you can take. So, I mean, statistics, computer science, anything you can get in. Once you get into the specialized programs like a criminal justice program, anything in the cybercrime front, you can get any supplemental languages that you can get that can really help elevate you in these positions. Any of that stuff that just we always they talk about the analyst toolbox, and you always just want to be just filling it up with as much as you can. So, I mean, you just try and get as much variety as you can because I mean I think that's really where you're going to thrive as an analyst, where you're not just doing, okay, yeah, I'm really good at this one thing, but if you're only good at the one thing, it doesn't really get you very far. So I mean, you've got to be really good at multiple different things and just get as much training and experience as you can.
So during your time in France, and you had mentioned that you come back to the States for various trainings. When you come back, is there something that you always kind of seek out? Is there something that you're like, I need something to remind me of home, or there's something that you kind of
Yeah.
seek out, eat, stay at, visit? Is there something like that for you?
Yes, I mean you're living in France where you have some of the the best restaurants around. So when you come back to the US, you want this, good American junk food. So I don't want to ruin any future sponsorship opportunities. But you come home and you want Taco Bell and KFC and things like that.
And you mentioned you had a family. Do they ever have any requests when you come back to the States?
So they haven't been back yet. So we'll see. It's hard to travel with young kids.
Well, no, I mean, like you're here now. Do they always send you with a shopping list?
Oh yeah. So every time you come, you've got the peanut butter and ranch dressing and all the things that the necessities.
Brian, thank you for kind of giving us a background as far as what you do right now, your responsibilities in France. But we're actually going to be kind of tying this back to some of a previous case that you have worked back in Michigan. As I said at the beginning of the episode, we were going to get into the case of Champaign Charlie. So, can you kind of start with the introduction of that and kind of providing a brief background of how this case came to be?
Yeah, of course. So we kind of when we were talking leading up to this, we thought looking at some of the past cases, this I thought this would be a really good case. It's kind of one of those things where you're looking at it from an IA standpoint and just an investigative standpoint in general. It had a little bit of everything, so it kind of highlights some of the things that analysts can do to kind of support a financial investigation. So this case kind of originated back in 2011. Agent Klein in the Detroit office was working with, at the time we were working closely with the Michigan State Police. So he and Trooper Osborne had been contacted by Sam's Club. So they were experiencing a bunch of fraud in all of their stores, kind of spread throughout the Midwest. And that's usually how these kind of go, where they'll reach out to us looking for support. They know something's going on, don't really know who, don't really know what, kind of reach out to us to see what we can do to fill in the gap. So at that point, they had suffered about $200,000 in loss over the past 3, 4, 5 months, and they were reaching out to see what we could do to help them out.
So in this situation, and again, my time in the service, I've been hearing about different types of credit card fraud, where it could be through skimming. We've talked about that in the past. We've also talked about, for example, the credit card would be skimmed either at the gas pump or at a credit card machine. I've also heard that people will basically socially engineer individuals to actually put money on cards and give them the card amount, that the card number, so that they can actually go online and spend that money. So in this particular case, was there anything that was specific to the fraud? Was there something that they were saying, we see all this happening, but this is kind of where how it's
Yeah,
happening?
yeah. So the ultimately, I mean, this kind of ties in at the end when you kind of put all the pieces together.
Okay.
But what was is the I guess kind of what was unique on the front end, where they going in, if you've been to Sam's Club, you got to have a membership card. So, they're starting to look at these. So they were going in and signing up for fraudulent Sam's Club accounts so they could get access to the store. And then they were buying high end electronics with these stolen credit cards. So, as was often the case kind of in Detroit, you didn't have, where in some of the bigger offices, you may be dealing with people that are actually, doing the hacks and stealing the information and making the cards. In Detroit, oftentimes we're getting kind of the end level users. So they were kind of buying. So we, in this case, ultimately they were buying it from somebody who was buying it off the dark web, selling it to a middleman, and then they were, selling it to these kind of runners around Detroit, and that's kind of where we started at. And then, if you really want to make an impact, you want to kind of work your way up the line. So we kind of started at the base level of, here's the low level people that are kind of wreaking havoc in our jurisdiction.
So Ryan, these fraud cases are popping up, and the Michigan State Troopers come to the Secret Service as far as looking for help, and the agents start getting involved. At what point do they start working with you to start developing that, or asking you to do your analysis work on these crimes?
So kind of one of the, they start getting the initial facts and kind of seeing what they have. And at that point, in Detroit, the agents would then come to me and say, here's what we've got, you know, what ideas you have, what can you do to support, what can you do to help. So kind of the first things we're looking at is, financial records oftentimes. I mean, you're doing financial analysis on Sam's Club because, they're the victim. They're providing all of kind of their data. Here's the losses. Here's when we took the losses, dates, times. This we mentioned the Sam's Club account. So you've got the photos. We know they're fake names, but at least you kind of have that as a starting point. So now you're trying to look for any kind of patterns in the financials to say, okay, they're hitting these locations at these times or these dates, and trying to do anything to kind of piece that together as you kind of move it along. And then working closely with the fraud departments at the private retailers, they start looking at their stuff. So kind of where this one broke for us was they were able to identify a license plate on one of the vehicles that was fleeing the scene, and then that kind of led to our first ID in this much larger fraud ring. So now you've got you've ID'd one person. So on that day, you've got that person, and then you had all these fraudulent accounts that they're signing up for Sam's Club, but oftentimes they were using fake names, but people they you get in there and you're thinking, oh, I'm just going to sign up for this thing with a fake name, and then you're asking, oh, phone number, and now you're starting to put in these things, and it's hard when you actually think about it to come up with a number just out of nowhere or an
Mhm.
email out of nowhere. So you're doing things that are kind of close to maybe what might be your real one. And there was an analyst in this case that with the state police that was able to take a piece of information from one of those fraudulent applicants that ultimately led to the identification of a Facebook account for Champaign Charlie, which was an alias for kind of our initial main suspect, and ended up being the name of the case was named after that, kind of because they identified that Facebook account.
Right, and that was kind of why I wanted to ask that. I wanted to ask that question of how these case titles come up because I know there was a report that came out a couple years ago because being in the military, they'll always name an operation, but it doesn't really have
Yeah,
meaning to it. So I didn't know if that was the same case in this, but we have our answer here as
yeah,
far as
yeah.
how we
It's
name cases and things like
right.
that.
Sometimes they name themselves.
And that's kind of like when we had you on in the prior episode, you were talking about like how you're taking data points and these different logs and databases and different things and kind of making that triangulation. In this situation, I mean, did it? You just basically were able to just triangulate as far as what these data points would point towards, and you were able to make that arrest. So after you have this individual identified on Facebook, I mean, what's the next step as far as like going through the case?
Yeah, so one of the kind of the unique things with this case was the power of social media. It's one of those things. It's great. People use it in their daily lives, but they're putting it all out there in the public space. I mean, oftentimes people think of big government spying on me and all those things, but oftentimes you're putting it out there for everybody in the public to see. So we would a lot of times in this case we were able to kind of use that information that they were putting out into public space to move our case further along. So we use this to identify associates, friends. You look at the friends list, you look at photos and things like that. So from there, they were able to identify because, like we talked about with the, going in and getting fraudulent Sam's Club cards, we went through the Facebook account, and the trooper was able to go through and pick out the friends and say, okay, well, that's that person, and really kind of build that out. And then that's where they kind of come to me looking to, say, hey, we've got all this information. We want to kind of see it, one clear picture. And that's where the analyst can come in and kind of make that clear picture where, you see the chart on the wall, and it kind of, you can look at it and see how the hierarchy starts to kind of build itself out.
Now, is there any official method to be able to map that stuff out, or is it a personal IA's preference of how they do that and how they explain it?
No, it's one of those things I think everybody kind of does it differently. So, the IAs have an annual conference, and one of the things we did a couple years ago was everybody kind of provided a couple samples to put up in a PowerPoint, just during breaks you can kind of see it because it's interesting to kind of see. Oh, I never kind of thought to do it that way, but everybody just kind of you learn what works for you, what kind of makes sense in your head, and then ultimately you try and make it make sense to to the investigator. My approach with the charts is I've always tried to, you'll often see these, big spider webs, but it doesn't really tell you anything. It may mean something to the person that put it together, but it's not going to mean anything to a jury or a prosecutor. So you kind of want to, make it more simplistic so that when you lay it out on the table, somebody can look at it, knows nothing about the case and say, okay, I can kind of see it there. And then you can kind of explain it as you go. And it becomes a more useful investigative tool.
And you mentioned, sorry, kind of going on a little tangent here. You said an IA conference. Is that within the Secret Service, or is that with our law enforcement partners?
No, so that's just within the investigative support division. So that's just kind of where all the analysts come together once a year to, exchange ideas, get training, and do those things.
Do you do anything outside the organization to, such as different conferences and things like that?
Yeah. So I mean, it's everything's kind of going into the cyber realm now. So I mean, you've got all the cryptocurrency conferences, and it's one of those things that the field's always evolving. So if you're not evolving yourself, you're going to be ultimately, I think, left behind. So you're always trying to get out there and get to as much training as you can to improve yourself and do the job better.
So you finally have the individual that's, you identify them on Facebook, and you kind of get that picture of who this person is and what they're doing and what they're committing. Again, I guess I would ask you what would be the next steps after that for just the listeners?
Yeah. So then, I mean, you kind of you talk with the investigators, and they kind of come up with their plan, and ultimately, you want to move it as high up the line as you can to have the most community impact. Low level people that are just kind of cashing it out, and there's the loss to the business, but if you knock this one out, there's going to be another crew coming right behind them. So, you start doing interviews, and, people start turning on each other, and you kind of work the next rung up. And what was interesting with this case was, social media again. That was somebody who was very active on Twitter. So, wanted to post where they were going all the time. And that was somebody who, they had identified, but they haven't been able to track down. What was really interesting in this case was, one day he put out on Twitter, I'm about to go get a workout at LA Fitness, and we were there waiting for him. So it was really interesting just how you can kind of leverage social media to really do your job better as law enforcement.
So is it one of those things where you are already there waiting for him, or do you just kind of walk into the gym and you make the arrest?
No, so I believe they had made the arrest when he was exiting, but it's one of those things. It's not automated, So with social media, it's a labor intensive process. So you have to have aggressive investigators that are always going to be looking after it, and that's where the analysts can kind of help support those operations as well, and always stay on top of it. And
See, that's where I want to know if, like, you walk in and the guy's like doing a bench press, and you're just like, "Hey, you need a spot," and then he looks up and he realizes that the jig is
that's
up.
how they should have done it. Maybe I'll have to talk to him about it.
I think from that aspect, now you're connecting all the dots. You're now getting the individuals together and being able, like as you were saying, you kind of start that interview process with each one of them, and then you kind of start building your way up, almost like climbing the pyramid in a sense, to
Yeah,
figure out where that person is. Because even at that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, that even when you get to that top of the pyramid of who you think it is, it may not even be the end of it.
right.
So, I mean, can you talk more about maybe the interview process and kind of how that works, and maybe more in broad terms?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess just kind of going back a little, going and you've made this arrest. You want to say, okay, this is the person that's done it, and you have your suspicions, but you're still then going to try and backfill these things. Now that you've got the person, you're going to be doing supplemental search warrants on, in this case, so Champaign Charlie, they then subpoenaed his legitimate bank account, and now you're trying to match those things up. So that's one of the things that the analyst did, where matching up. Here's where his real card purchases were, and here's where the fraud was taking place. And you see that as he's going around the Midwest in St. Louis and in Ohio and all these things, his real card purchase for gas or wherever was in the same area at the same time that the fraudulent purchases were being made. So you've
Okay.
kind of got that. So after they made the arrest of the guy at LA Fitness, he then gave information on kind of the next rung up, and this is the actual the source of the cards. So one of the things we had was the agent on the case is really creative. It was great to work with him, and we would always be talking about ideas, and he would say, "Hey, I'm going down to South Carolina. I'm going to interview who we suspect is his girlfriend. Don't know if she's going to cooperate. What can we kind of do?" And we talked about before, we had this, analytical, this link chart that we had created. So one of the kind of the interesting things we did with this case was, using our tools, they're not going to make it easy. So you've got to, be smart. You've got to use your tools in whatever way you can. So we had this chart that, main bad guy in South Carolina was supplying these cards. We rearranged the chart where now, it makes it seem like, she's, the girlfriend is the source of
Hmm.
the cards, and main bad guy is just a small part of the case, just an
Hmm.
associate. So, then it's really effective when you then sit down in the interview and you say, "Hey, look, we already know what's going on.
Hmm.
We know you're, the head of the pyramid, and people often look at it and go, whoa, whoa, that's not, I wasn't that. And it's just kind of using those tools and being creative and doing whatever you can to kind of help move that along. And then kind of going back to the social media, everything's kind of out there in the public. So one of the things he had told me when he's doing interviews is it's important to kind of build that rapport, and it's to kind of know who you're going to be interviewing. So you go out there and everybody puts on Facebook what they like. So even just little things like, you're a fan of the Cleveland Indians, or you like this kind of music and all this stuff, where then you can kind of sit down and just kind of weave those things in. And you think like, oh, wow, this guy that, he's trying to throw you in jail, but you think, oh, he's just like me. We're just pals here talking, and it just kind of builds that rapport, and it can be really effective. And I think that's where analysts can help kind of build that packet to show, okay, here's kind of who you're going in, so you know what you're walking into and who you're talking to.
And so in this situation, you didn't lure him out or anything like that, as far as lure him out to the public to do it. You just kind of found out all the information
Yeah,
through.
right.
Okay.
You just kind of find out all the stuff they're putting out into the public space, and then use that in your favor.
Okay. And so in that situation, now you've gotten to the next level. So you have the producer of the cards in this situation, and you're on the next step. Was there anything specific, like from that point on? Was he manufacturing them, or he was doling them out as far as like
Right.
giving them out and selling them? I mean, from that point, where did you go in that
Yeah.
situation?
No, so I mean, he looked at it as he was just a businessman. So he was buying fraudulent cards off the dark web, and then he was trying to layer himself enough that didn't think we could kind of trace it back to him. But it's with persistence, you can always trace it back. So even when people think they've kind of created this layer of insulation, usually there's some trace somewhere that'll lead us back.
And so, like in this situation, how often do you come by these cases? Because I'm coming to find out as more and more I interview individuals from the Secret Service that like one of our realms is financial crimes, but it seems like this is a business that seems to keep self-replicating. People think that it's okay to continue stealing people's information,
Right.
creating these cards and selling them. But like, is this does this occurrence happen often within your line of work?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's an everyday thing. So I mean, you try to put a dent in it, and that's where kind of talking about the importance of working your way up the line is to do that as often as you can, and you're trying to get it because you ultimately you want to kind of cut off the source, and part of that is developing really good relationships with their private partners to do more on their end, where they can to protect our information that's out there, and kind of do that. But then when the crimes are occurring, just try to work them up as high as we can.
Okay, and you find that like the banking organizations are really willing to help kind of put a stamp out on this, as far as like when you give them a call, like in that area. Is there like specifically people that and talk to at the different banking organizations when you establish these relationships, or is it something that where like can you explain that kind of relationship?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, you rely on each other heavily. So I mean, every bank, a lot of the big businesses, even smaller businesses now, will have with loss prevention or fraud, managers or associates that are tasked with investigating things on their side. And ultimately, you've got to kind of have that partnership and work together, because there's some things that we can bring to the table that they don't have, and there's some things that they have that we don't have. So it's that partnership where you have to work together to really work these things effectively.
Ryan, I want to thank you for being on the show. Again, second time. Really appreciate your time and being able to talk to us about these stories, especially about Champaign Charlie. So I guess I'll leave it to you. Is there anything you would like to say to the listeners or anybody in the Secret Service?
No, I mean, I just thank you for the opportunity. I think it's really good to highlight some of the successes of ISD, and it's one of those things. I guess I would just put out that we're always here, ready and eager to support whatever investigations we have, and it's been good talking with you.
And I think I speak on behalf of the listeners that I hope we have you back on the show again to share another case or to share another story. But until then, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
For more information about the Secret Service or how to join, please go to www.secretservice.gov. And until next time, listeners, stay vigilant.